Rabbi Akiva says they brought the daily sacrifice from Mount Sinai all the way throughout the desert, throughout the time of the desert. They brought the daily sacrifice, and on that, the Gemara he brings this verse that says God complained that we never brought sacrifices, and on that he answers that the Shvat Levi were the ones who sponsored that sacrifice. They didn't sin with the golden calf; they're the ones who brought it, meaning they paid for it, and it was not considered that the Jewish people brought it. So we had brought the carbon oilus throughout the time, but it was only the Levium. So that's why it says that the Jewish people didn't really bring these sacrifices. Now there is a source that says that they did bring. There's a source in another Gemara that says they did bring sacrifices. So the commentaries reconcile that by saying that they brought individual sacrifices, but they didn't bring communal sacrifices. So the bottom line is that that's what it's referring to when it says that you didn't bring the sacrifices in the desert. Even if we did bring the daily burnt offering, that would have been either the Levium. The Levium brought that, and even the sacrifices that they did bring were personal sacrifices. So that's to answer your question, Mordechai. Did you want to?
Yesterday, the thing that I said was a medrash was really Masechta Megillah, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, where the names of the Sarei Parasuma they referred to the Malachim asking Hashem, did the Goyim bring you this type of sacrifice? Did the Goyim bring you that type of sacrifice?
Implying that the Jews did bring those sacrifices.
Right.
And it had something to do with in the desert?
No, it didn't say in the desert, but the thing about Amos asking, did you bring me these? Did you bring these sacrifices? Reminded me of what it said over there about them. But
just reminded you of it. Okay, fine. So it had nothing to do with the desert. Okay.
Right. About did so and so about did so and so bring this sacrifice?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, now you can hear me?
But not before.
Okay, I think I'm back.
Yeah.
Everyone hears me? Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I did see an AT&T truck outside. So I think they are working on their wiring and stuff. Okay. So that's that previous Gemara about Divrei Torah and Divrei Kabbalah lo yalfina. The Gemara concluded and said that the reason we're calling Me'ilos, the reason we're calling Chagigos, that it's mountains hanging on a thread, is because you don't have a Gzeira Shava from Nach to Torah. Normally you have a Gzeira Shava from Torah to Torah, but you don't have Divrei Torah from Divrei Kabbalah lo yalfina. We don't learn Divrei Torah from Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah refers to Nevi'im and Ksuvim, and Amos is one of the Nevi'im Achronim. It's one of the small from the 12 small booklets of the Nevi'im. So we don't have Divrei Torah from Divrei Kabbalah. So Rashi says it's only more of a remez. It's a hint. It's not a real Gzeira Shava. And therefore, it's like the source that we brought, that we bring Chagiga is very is not a solid source, is not solidly written in the Torah. Okay, then the Gemara says Me'ilos, and we started this Gemara but I think I'm going to start it again. Me'ilos, the laws of Me'ilah, Michtan Ksivi. Let me tell you where we're starting. We are at the two dots. We're on page 10b. We're at the two dots, and we must be about 20 lines from the bottom. Let me count it. 9, 10. Yeah, about 20 lines from the bottom. Michtan Ksivi, Me'ilah, the laws of Me'ilah. We learned yesterday what Me'ilah is. It's using consecrated funds for personal use, either benefiting from them or actually using them, or take it could be money, consecrated money, or consecrated items, and so on. Now the Gemara says Michtav Ksivan. It's written in the Torah, the laws of Me'ilah. So Amar Rami Bar Chama says that what we said, that it's hanging on a mountain, hanging on a hair, that refers to a specific type of case in Me'ilah. It's not talking about the general laws of Me'ilah. It's loy nitzrach. It's not needed. This statement that it's like mountains hanging by a hair, it's not needed only for a certain type of case. And what is that case? Like we learned in a Mishnah. And what is the Mishnah talking about? The Mishnah is talking about that a guy wants to use his money to buy something. So he sends an emissary, he gives him some money, and he goes to go buy something. And what does the guy do? If he uses that money to buy. Problem is that money is consecrated money. So the balabayas, who's the sender, didn't know that it was, he forgot that it was consecrated money. And the emissary obviously didn't know. He's totally in the dark, because it's not even his money in the first place. So he totally doesn't know. And the balabayas is the sender mistakenly used that money, forgot. So the Gemara talks about who is going to be obligated in bringing this sacrifice called the Me'ilah, who's going to have to bring the extra fifth, which we spoke about, and so it depends on the case. So let's read it inside. Let's learn it inside. Like we learned in a Mishnah, an emissary that did his shlichus, he fulfilled his mission appropriately. So Baal Habayis Mal, it says the sender is the one who's going to be guilty of Me'ilah. Now, does that make sense? Why should the sender be guilty of Me'ilah? So normally, it's not that surprising. Normally, according to Jewish law, when you send someone to do something, it's as if the sender did it. So when you send an emissary, it's like you're doing it. For example, there is a concept. It's not advisable, but there is a concept that you could send someone, you could send an emissary to marry a woman for you. In other words, that person is going to hand over a ring to a certain woman, and say, you are mekudesh, you are married to such and such, to that person, and that would work. Shliach shel adam kamaisa. Of course, it would have to be witnesses there and so on, but it would be valid. A witness, an emissary, is a legal matter that's binding. It's a bind. You could even give a get if the person was divorcing their spouse. They could send an emissary to hand the get to their spouse to divorce her. That it would be legally binding. Of course, it would be in front of witnesses and so on. But it would be legally binding. Sending an emissary. An emissary has halachic ramifications. Now here, you send someone to buy food or buy something with your personal something personal with your with this consecrated funds. So it would make sense that the sender is liable. The only thing is, this is a sin. When it comes to a sin, we normally say, Ein shliach l'dvar averu, that you don't consider someone an emissary when it comes to a sin. In other words, when a person sins, he sort of carries the responsibility of the sin. The person who sins is sort of maybe he's guilty of placing an obstacle in front of someone. He encouraged you to sin, but the bottom line is you're the one who did the sin. So in our Mishnah here, this Mishnah that we're bringing, I should say, not our Mishnah, the Mishnah that we're bringing in this Gemara, the Mishnah says that the shliach, if he does his shlichus properly, he fulfills his mission, then the sender is the one who's going to be guilty of me'ilah, of using consecrated funds for personal use. The sender is. If the emissary did not do exactly as he was told, for example, he was told to buy steak, and he went and he bought orange juice. So he didn't fulfill it. He used the money. He used these consecrated money for personal use, but he didn't fulfill his mission. So shliach mal, in this case, the fact that the person sent him is really not connected, because he didn't do what he was sent to do. So then we just look at it as the shliach is the one who did me'ilah, who used these consecrated funds for personal use. So the shliach is mal. He's going to be the one who's going to bring a sacrifice called the asham me'ilos, and he's going to have to pay back the principal and the extra fifth, which actually is a quarter, is a 25% penalty. Now, the Gemara asks, if he did his shlichus, if he fulfilled his mission properly, he bought what the sender told him to buy with this money. Why is he considered why is the Gemara, it doesn't say it clearly, but it means, why is the sender the one who's going to be considered guilty and have to pay and fulfill the obligations of me'ilah? When it comes to sin, we don't normally look at the person who sent you. We look at the person who does the sin, because we don't consider there to be an emissary, an emissary dynamic when it comes to sin. That emissaries work when it comes to doing a good deed, when it comes to doing an act of acquisition, an emissary works. When it comes to sin, that process, that mechanism is not a valid mechanism. And does it make sense that this one sins and the other one becomes liable? The other one's obligated? We don't have such a rule. Ain't shliach l'dvar aveiro. There's no shliach when it comes to a sin, and therefore we don't look at him as an emissary from the sender. We look at him as a man on his own 2 feet, and he's got to pay the price if he sins. Now, so does it make sense that the sender is going to have to pay just because this guy did it? So the first Gemara's answer, the first thought of the Gemara is that that's what it means, that it's mountain suspended by a hair, because there's a certain law in these regarding the laws of me'ilah that's unclear, that it's not understood, and we don't understand why this should be the law, and that's called harunin tluyin b'sayru. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I really don't see the difference here, because he was sent to do a sin, and he did the sin. He just didn't do the sin that he was asked to do.
That's a different case. Okay, in that
there
case,
is difference as to who is responsible?
So the simple understanding is that we don't look at him anymore as being a extension of the sender. Once he changes things around, we look at him as a individual of his own. Until now, we would have looked at him as an extension of the sender, and we can relate his act to the sender. Now he's misacting. He's acting not according to his his role. So he's basically acting on his own. He's no longer an extension of the sender. So that's the meaning of the Mishnah. That the difference between the two cases.
I would think that both of them are responsible if he was asked to begin with. He was asked to use that money for personal use. He used it.
So you think both should
use, but not the same.
You think both
are responsible?
So both should really bring sacrifices of Me'ilah.
I think
both should pay a penalty. Okay. That's sounds good, especially if you sell the animals to the people bringing sacrifices. That would be a good business, but a good business move. But the Mishnah says not that way, and the Mishnah says only one of them would be guilty. But the thing is, we're not really learning the laws of Me'ilah now. We're really just touching on it and mentioning that it's really mentioned here as a side point. So if we wanted to go into the laws of Me'ilah, it is an interesting tractate, and it's an enjoyable tractate, very nice tractate that could be learned. But I'm not really sure how to take your question, like to what extent it could be, is it clear from the verses not that way, or it's but the simple understanding of the Mishnah is that only one of them is going to be obligated in Me'ilah, and we got to figure out which one it is. And the Mishnah says that it depends if this man does his shlichus or he doesn't do his shlichus. So the Gemara wants to refute this explanation, and the Gemara says that that's not really a good question, that we would say it's like mountains hanging by a hair. Amar Rava says, Umay Kushya. And what's the question that you think is so surprising? So surprising that the emissary does the act, and the sender is the one who's gonna have to be liable? Is that surprising? That's the typical law of being an emissary. Dilma, maybe. Shani Me'ilah. Me'ilah is different. That we don't look at when you do a sin that it no longer are you an extension of the sender. Me'ilah is different, that even when you do a sin, you are still an extension of the sender, and your act relates back to the sender. The Yalfa, because we learn the law of sending an emissary, we learn the law of Me'ilah from Truma, and that applies to sending an emissary. The Yalfa, because we learn Chet Mitruma, a Gzeira Shava, and here it's a real Gzeira Shava. This is a real source, that it has a word written by the laws of Truma and a word written by the laws of Me'ilah, and it says Chet, Bishkaga, it says you sin by mistake. That's referring to the laws of misusing consecrated funds. Chata Bishkaga Mikadshei Hashem. And it says the same word Chet by Truma. It says V'loi Sisu Olav Chet. It's talking about Truma. and that the koyanim have to guard the truma and so on. So ma hasam, just like over there, shluchei shaladim kamaisai, the law is that a emissary can separate truma, and he's considered as if the owner separated the truma, just like over there, the shliach is like himself, like the owner. Afkan, here also regarding me'ilah, we learned shluchei shaladim kamaisai, that even though we're talking about a sin, nevertheless, we relate the act back to the sender. So in other words, this is a law that doesn't fall into the normal category of a sin, that we no longer, by a sin, we don't relate your act back to the sender. And we don't say you're an emissary, because normally we say you should not have listened to the sender, you should listen to God. So normally we say when it comes to a sin, we don't consider you an extension of the sender. But here, regarding the laws of Me'ilah, there's a Shvat to Truma. In Truma, we have a special law about sending an emissary, using an emissary. So here we will say that whenever you do Me'ilah, you are considered an emissary, and we relate your act back to the original sender who told you to do this, and we consider him the responsible party. So that's what Rava says, and therefore he says it's not surprising at all that the sender would be responsible for the Me'ilah. Now, the Gemara then says, so Rava has his own interpretation. Ella Amar Rava, rather Rava says, Loi nitzracha, it's not needed to say that the laws of Me'ilah are like mountains hanging by a hair, only regarding a different law. He says, this law that you said, that's not the case. That's not the right answer. That's not the explanation. It's a different thing. That on the one hand, the laws of Me'ilah are specified in the Torah, but there is a certain case where it is hanging by a hair, where it is surprising. It's not needed only for a certain type of case that we learned in a brisa. The brisa that mentions a case where an individual has money of Hegdish, and they got exchanged in his hand with his personal money, and he handed the Hegdish money, the sanctified money, to the emissary in order to buy for him some type of clothing. And Nizkar Balabayas, now if the sender remembered, I gave him the wrong money. So if he remembers that, V'lei Nizkar Shliach, but the Shliach, literally it means he didn't remember, but it means he didn't know anything about it. So now what happened is you already sent the emissary, and then after he left already, and we don't have cell phones in those days, so you're stuck. They don't have telephones. You can't call anyone. And now you're stuck. He already went to buy the clothing that you asked him to buy. And you now just realized that you handed him the wrong envelope. And that envelope was the consecrated funds. So, Nizkar Balabayas, V'lei Nizkar Shliach. So the Balabayas now knows that it's consecrated, and the Shliach doesn't know. So we are sure that the Balabayas, the sender, is not interested anymore in having the emissary buy this product for him. And the reason he doesn't want is because you're not allowed to. He gave him the wrong money. So the sender is retracting from his shlichus. The problem is the shliach knows nothing about it. He was given money, so he goes and buys. So the law is shliach mal. The shliach is the one who is guilty of me'ilah. So he's going to have to pay the penalty and bring the sacrifice. He's liable. And Rava asks Ezra's question, Shliach Anya Maikov, this poor Shliach. Doesn't mean physically, it doesn't mean financially poor. It means the poor guy. Shliach Anya Maikov, what did he do? He was just trying to fulfill what the guy asked him to do him a favor. He didn't know that the other guy canceled the shlichus, and why should he be guilty? And so this is what our Mishnah says, Hainu kaharin hatluyin b'sayra. This is what it means, that the laws of Me'ilah are like mountains hanging by a hair, and the Gemara is understanding it to mean that it's a surprising law in regarding the laws of Me'ilah. So at this point, the Gemara understands this case to be a very surprising law.
Rabbi,
I'm sorry, yeah.
so I have a problem with this. Number one, the shaliach, the sender was the one who screwed up. He gave it to the shaliach. Okay, the sender remember or figures out that he made a mistake. Okay, but he was the one who already gave the envelope to the man, so he still should be on the hook for the problem, not the shaliach, because the shaliach is doing exactly what he's being told to do. Okay, and we already have the situation in the past where it says if the shaliach is doing exactly what the sender is telling him to do, okay, then it's the sender who's on the hook, not the shaliach. If the shaliach had changed anything, okay, then I could understand, but he didn't. He's following exactly the words, and he's doing exactly what he was told to do. Just because the sender goes, oh my God, I gave the wrong envelope to the individual, that's not enough of a reason to say, oh, he's off the hook. It's the shaliach who's responsible for this.
So the Gemara later is going to mention that this case is really very surprising, because we should consider this karoiv la'oinus, much closer to a case of you're forced to do something against your will. And this should be a similar type of case where you really, he really had nothing to do with this.
Rabbi,
yeah,
your explanation that you're giving right now assumes that the shaliach already knows the problem exists, but he doesn't. You know, when you say honest, it means that, I'm being forced to do something, but that assumes that I know that it's already wrong and I'm being forced to continue to do the job. That's not the case here. If you had a cell phone and the guy called him and the guy says, okay, I could understand it's karov le'onis, but here there is no such thing. You know, the shaliach doesn't know any better. He has an envelope. He's given a job. He's going to do the job, and he does it. And as it turns out, it's money that should not have been used, but he didn't know anything about it. So why in heaven's name is he the one who's on the hook for all of this?
Right. So this question is what Rava is saying. It's Taharin Tluyim B'Saira. This is what the Gemara considers that it is very surprising. It's so surprising that the Mishnah even calls this a case that it's hotter until it's like hanging by a hair. That's totally shocking to hear that this would be the law. So the Gemara is understanding it the way you're understanding it. And what I mentioned is that the Gemara later, there's a term in the Gemara, it's used mainly, it's used in Tractate Makos, where it talks about Karav Lamezid or Karav La'inas, that there's something called a shoygeg, which is generally understood as just a mistake. But there are different types of mistakes. And sometimes a mistake is where you're a little more guilty. Sometimes you're medium guilty. And sometimes you're almost zero guilty. So karav lamezid is when you're a little more guilty. Shoygeg, regular plain shoygeg, is where you're just medium. And karav la'inas is where you're almost zero. Very minimal guilt, if any. I mean, you might have done an act that was wrong, but it's called karav la'inas. So it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to mean. I know you said that it means karav la'inas is where you know and you're being forced. It's a term used in the Gemara to mean where you're totally unaware and it's called karav la'inas. It's a shoygeg that's karav la'inas. It's much more like being forced. It's similar to being forced into something where you have no choice at all to do it or not. So the Gemara is understanding it that way, and we'll soon see the way the Gemara develops a little further. But at this point, and I'm mentioning that to you because at this point, the Gemara is going to say, maybe we could understand this. And I just want you to know that the Gemara later will come back and say, no, it's more like Ezra was saying, that it's karav la'inas. It's considered more closer to a case of total, like no choice. You had no choice in the matter. It was nothing to do with you. And so we'll soon see how that, how the Gemara comes to that. But in the meantime, the Gemara, Rava wants to claim this is the surprising thing, and he's very shocked by this law. And the Gemara now will say that Rav Ashi says it's not that surprising. So that's what we're going to see. But it's a good question, Ezra. Definitely, this is what Rava feels. Is also very surprised that why should this be the halacha? So, I mean, and to answer your question, why is it that way? It seems that it's like a technical situation that ends up being, he ends up falling into this situation where where it's sort of like technically the shliach, the mashaleach, the sender should have been responsible, but the shlichus ends once he realized. That causes the shlichus to end, and it ends up that the only person who it relates back to is the person who did the act. So technically, it ends up that he's the one responsible, but logically, as you're saying, it seems very surprising that he should be the one who's guilty. Now,
I could understand nowadays where the sender can call the guy and basically said, "Don't use the money; it's the wrong envelope."
Right.
Okay. But in those days, you couldn't do that.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. This is Rava's claim. It's your claim.
So how can you then say, once I, as the sender, realize the problem, what the problem is, I'm off the hook. And it's all on the other guy's shoulders. And my response is, you're not off the hook.
Yeah, I don't
sent him with the wrong envelope.
Yeah, I don't know that you can say the guy's totally off the hook. I would say that he would be guilty of like lefnei iver loisite michshol, don't put a stumbling block before, he sort of caused someone to sin. He has some level of guilt in him. But the law of me'ilah would relate back to this act that it ended up that this person did. And this person would end up being bringing. In other words, the sender, he caused this guy a loss. He caused this guy to, it was not this guy's. You're right. It's not this guy's fault. but the act was done, and it ends up that that this person ends up paying a price for something that he really should not have to pay, and that's surprising. And the
So
Gemara
does
is very bothered with that.
So does the
Gemara says,
sender then have to give
no,
the korban to
Nope.
the shaliach because of the fact that he caused him to sin
Because-
unwittingly?
So there's laws about grama, causing someone a loss. In other words, there's different rules of to what extent you can be obligated in being responsible. You know what I mean? Like you hired a taxi and the taxi drove slower than you expected and you missed your flight. So that's caused you to lose money. But are you going to say that he's going to have to pay you for a new flight? No, it's laws of grama. It's not so clear that you would be able to obligate him. Someone came to me with this shaila. He said his friend had his earpods, which are like $250. These earpods, they stayed in some hotel, and the two guys stayed in a hotel. One of the guys irresponsibly left his earpods there. The other guy sees the earpods. He thought it's his, so he took the earpods with him and packed up, and they both left the hotel room. In the end, it turns out that those earpods were the first guy's earpods, right? So the thing is, the second guy wanted to say, it's your fault that I didn't look for mine because I thought those were mine because you left already. And these, I saw earpods, they were mine. So you caused me a loss of $250 because now you want me to give you back your earpods because those are the ones that I took and I thought they were mine. And I only took them because you left and you were irresponsible. It's all your fault that I lost my earpods. And he's right. He's got a claim, but he's not going to be able to force him to pay. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference between causing a loss, and there are some losses. If you tear someone's shirt, you pay for it. But if you cause, it's like a more indirect. You're causing the guy a loss. So this would be a grama. You caused him a loss. But the Gemara is not satisfied. The Gemara thinks that the owner should really be the one who buys the sacrifice and should need the sender. The Gemara thinks the sender, as you're thinking, that it is very surprising. This is a surprising law. And the Gemara calls it a harin tluyin b'saira, very hard to understand. And Rava is very uncomfortable with this law. It's a law, but why should it be this way? So you're not alone, Ezra. The Rava also felt that this is a very hard thing. Now Rav Ashi argues on it. Rav Ashi, on the other hand, and that's the next little piece, he thinks that this is not that surprising. It's called a shaygig. He's going to say, listen, what is me'ilah? What is the case of using consecrated funds for personal use? All the cases of me'ilah are mistakes. This is the laws of mistakes. This is exactly these laws where you didn't do it intentionally. You did something, you used something, it was a mistake, and you're going to have to pay for it. It's a mistake. You definitely had no intention to use holy things for personal use. You had zero intention for that. It's called the shaygig. That's the laws of me'ilah. There are laws for a mazid, but they don't bring the sacrifice, and they don't bring that penalty. So the general laws of me'ilah that we talk about, which is bring the sacrifice and bringing the penalty, that is specifically cases of shaygig. This is all the cases. It's case of shaygig. So this is another case of shaygig. It's surprising this guy has to pay. Every case is surprising. The shaygig, person who does it by mistake, he's got to pay the price. You got to. This is what the laws of me'ilah are all about. So let me read it inside. Amar Rav Ashi says, and let me tell you where we are. We are about 7 lines up from the bottom, maybe 8 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Ashi, my kushya. Rav Ashi says, What's the question? You're so surprised that you're going to make the emissary have to pay for this mistake? Dilma, maybe. Midi dahava. It's just like a moitzi ma'is, a person who takes out moitzi ma'is hegdish l'chulin, uses who takes out consecrated funds and uses it for chulin. In other words, the typical case where he thought that it's money of hegdish, and he thought it's mundane money, and he didn't realize that it was consecrated money. So every case is this case, and you got to end up paying a penalty, and you bring a sacrifice. So it's not that surprising. That's the laws of Meila are based on mistake, on the laws of a mistake, and the laws of a mistake is you end up bringing the sacrifice, paying a penalty, and in fact, the law, in fact, that's what it says by Meila. It mentions this law in the Torah. It says that you use consecrated funds by mistake, you pay this penalty. So it's pretty clear in the Torah. So this is not a very surprising case. So the Gemara says, so Rav Ashi has his own interpretation. So we have Rami. So what do we have so far? We have Rami Bar Chama wanted to say it's talking about a sender is going to have to pay the price for when the emissary does the sin. And Rami Bar Chama was surprised about that. And the Rava said that's not so surprising. That's a special law about being an emissary. You're an extension of the person who sent you. But the problem here, the surprising case, Rava says, is the case where you send someone and both of you didn't know that it was money of the consecrated money. Then you found out. So the mechanism of shlichus was canceled, and the concept of being an emissary was canceled. It ends up being that the emissary ends up being the one guilty. And here, Rava says that's very surprising because the poor emissary. And Rav Ashi says, what's so surprising about that? Every case of Meila is the poor guy. The poor guy, he made a mistake. He used consecrated funds. He's going to have to pay the price. I mean, it's not a huge, terrible loss, but it's a loss. He's going to have to buy a carbon, 2 coins, right? And he's got to pay a penalty of a fifth. And that's what he'll do. That's the case. So Rav Ashi has his own interpretation. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, does the shaliach have a case against the owner that sent him by mistake? Can he tell him, look, you caused me now a loss?
A loss, right. So that's what Ezra was wondering.
You told me to do it. Does he have a claim against the owner and saying, now you pay, correct my loss?
So there is a concept in the Mishnah, Ein olav ela tarumais. All he has on him is a complaint, which means that you can't really take it further than that and get money. But you do have a valid complaint, but it doesn't develop into a financial responsibility. Now, at least that's what it seems like from the law here. From the simple reading of the Gemara, it seems like there's no responsibility. Sometimes you find in Shulchan Aruch and in Gemara that it says "Lotzeis Yedei Shamayim," to fill your responsibility to the heavenly court, or to the to cover yourself completely, that you would go above and beyond. There is such a concept sometimes in monetary law that lotzeis yedei shamayim, to fulfill any claim against you in heaven, that you would go and pay this extra amount. But I'm not convinced that it applies here. It does sometimes mention such a thing, but I'm not convinced that this would be one of those cases. Okay. So the Gemara continues with Rav Ashi's way of interpreting. And Ella Amar Rav Ashi says, Loi nitzrach, it's not necessary to interpret the Mishnah of Kaharin Hatzluyim Besaira, that it's like mountains hanging by a hair, only for this specific case. Ella l'chadetnan, like we learned in a Mishnah, that Natal Evan, person took a stone, a koira, or a beam, shel hegdish, of hegdish, and he wanted to use it for himself. Harei zeh lo moal, he has not transgressed me'ilah. Nosna lachaveiroi, he gave it to his friend. The giver, who moal, the giver is considered to have transgressed the laws of me'ilah. V'chaveiroi, the recipient, loy moal, he has not transgressed, whatever he does with it, because once the initial person took it and handed it over to someone else, so he has transgressed already the me'ilah, and it has now become unholy already. So he took something that was holy, planning to use it for himself, for his personal use, but he didn't. So it didn't yet become unholy. But when he hands it to his friend, he says, you know what, you take it, you use it. That is where it now loses its holiness. And it now, the giver is the one who's going to have to pay the price. He's the one who has sinned and done me'ilah. And he took it because by handing it to his friend, he removed it from the category of consecrated. And by doing that, he's the one guilty, and the recipient is no longer guilty, even if the recipient uses it to build his house with this big stone or with this beam. He's not guilty because it already was unconsecrated by the giver handing it over to the recipient. So the Gemara says, just one second, Ezra. So the Gemara says, Michti, let's see. Mishkal Shakla, he took it for his own purpose, right? He took this stone. So Mali, what's the difference if he took it himself? Umali Chavera, what's the difference if he hands it to his friend? Why should there make any difference? Once he took it for himself, that should have already been considered that he was mal. Why only when he hands it to his friend would that change the status and make it considered that it has been it has lost its consecrated level? Even him just taking it, that's already some type of act that should have made it lose its consecrated holiness, and that should be enough. So the difference between these two cases is, specifically, why should it not be considered mal when he just takes it? That is what Rav Ashi is considering a harin tluyin besaira, a mountains hanging on a hair. So that's what the Rav Ashi is going to consider the surprising law of me'ilah. Yes, Ezra.
So, I mean, I can use Rav Ashi's methodology and basically say, in the case where the sender gives money which is consecrated to the shaliach, so at that point, would one then say the fact that he gave it to him, he's ma'al, and now the shaliach has money that is unconsecrated using the same methodology that the Rav Ashi is using here, that money is unconsecrated, and so therefore, for all intents and purposes, the shaliach should not be held liable for mal.
Excellent question. But the thing is that when he hands a gift to this friend, it basically is a change of some type of acquisition. And for some reason, that is much worse than him just taking something and having in mind to use it for his personal use. So for whatever reason, and again, this is bothering the Gemara that you shouldn't need to, this is bothering Rav Ashi that you shouldn't need to hand it over to someone. It should be enough you yourself taking it for your personal use. That is actually what's bothering Rav Ashi. But at least we have an understanding that what the Mishnah is talking about is by you handing it to someone else and giving it to them, you're somehow that is causing this like change of holiness on this item, because you're now handing it over to someone, doing this act of acquisition, so to speak, that's making it no longer holy. You're deconsecrating the item, and that doesn't apply when you're giving something over to an emissary. When you're handing something to an emissary, it is a continuation, an extension of you. He's just like your arm, your extended arm, continuing to move around with it. So the act of giving wouldn't affect it. But it's a good question. It sounds, but there is a difference in the fact that he's handing it to him as an emissary. Okay. Yes, Ben.
When he hands it over, he actually did two sins. He took it wrongly, and he gives it to his friend. His friend doesn't know that it's wrong. So now he's causing his friend to sin. So it's a double sin, and that's why he is responsible.
Okay. That's an interesting way of dividing it up into two separate sins. Okay. Anyway, that's what this is what how Rav Ashi understands it. Now, the Gemara asks on Rav Ashi, and it says, Umay Kushya, what's the big question? That when he takes it himself, that should be considered Me'ila already. Dilma maybe Kiddush Shmuel.